Every studio starts the same way. One room, one interface, and one set of decisions about how sound gets captured. And for a while, genuinely for quite a while, that is all you actually need to make great recordings. In a single room, the entire signal path is easy to hold in your head. One converter, one clock, everything you record sounds exactly like everything else you record. Then you add a second room to the building, and almost immediately, the questions start compounding, multiplying really faster than the channel count on either side of the wall ever does. The usual answer is a cheaper second interface for the new room. It works until you discover the vocal booth has different headroom and a different distortion signature to the live room. You find out at mixdown, which is the worst possible time to find out. The alternatives are not much kinder either. Optical chaining brings clocking errors that multiply with every device you add to the chain. Aggregate device workarounds destabilize the host without warning, and proprietary audio over IP wants licensing fees, plus its own dedicated switches. So most engineers compromise. Enough microphone preamps to track a kit almost always meant giving up the balanced line inputs you need for outboard and synthesizers. You buy the box that half fits and you work around it. None of that is actually inevitable, though it can certainly feel that way. It is simply a consequence of buying boxes one at a time, instead of designing a system from the start. The MOTU AVB series starts from the opposite end of the problem entirely, not with a single box but with an engine designed to scale. Three interfaces, the 16A, 848 and the 10 Pre, they are not a good, better, best ladder. They are three answers to the questions of what a particular room physically needs, and they carry the same market operating price of Rs 1,87,900 inclusive of GST. That price is identical because the engine underneath it is identical, not similar, genuinely identical. The same 32-bit floating point DSP, the same conversion stage, the same mixer architecture built into all three chassis without exception and without compromise. ESS Sabre32 Ultra conversion on every input and output, Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4 connectivity on every unit, a 64-channel CueMix Pro mixer running in every one of them. Sample rates run from 44.1 kHz all the way up to 192 kHz across every unit, and whichever front end the signal actually enters through, the mathematics applied to it are exactly the same mathematics every single time. Round-trip latency is approximately 1.8 milliseconds, measured at 96 kHz on a 32-sample host buffer. That figure does not change between the three units because there is nothing between them to change. CueMix Pro is a large format mixing console running entirely on the interface itself. 64 inputs, 32 buses with 4-band double precision EQ, compression, gating, and a high-pass filter on every single channel. Because that processing lives on the hardware and not on your computer, the host buffer size stops dictating what the performer hears. You can run a large buffer for a heavy mix and still monitor with no perceptible delay. Connection to the computer is Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 over a single Type-C cable at 40 gigabits per second, carrying up to 256 channels of host input and output simultaneously. Which brings us back to the price. When the engine is identical and the price is identical, the decision stops being about the quality. It becomes a much simpler question: which physical connections does this room actually need? And there is one more important thing. Every single unit shares a 2-port AVB switch built directly into the chassis, which means the first room you add costs you nothing extra in networking hardware. A headphone CueMix you build in the control room opens up completely intact on the tracking stage every single time. Same mixer, same recall, same result. So let us take the three front ends one at a time, starting exactly where the signal itself does, at the point of capture. The 10 Pre is the tracking specialist, where the other two allocate their front panel to routing and to monitoring. The 10 Pre spends almost all of its internal real estate on one thing: getting microphones into the digital domain cleanly, and a lot of them at once. Channels 1 and 2 carry their own dedicated send and return inserts, so an outboard preamp, compressor or EQ can sit directly in the path before conversion on exactly the two channels most likely to actually want one. 10 microphone preamplifiers, all built to the same standard, up to 74 decibels of gain, adjustable in precise 1 decibel increments, equivalent input noise of minus 129 decibel unloaded, and distortion measured at minus 110 decibel total harmonic distortion plus noise. 8 of those 10 combo inputs sit across the rear panel, cabled once and left alone. They accept microphone, line or high impedance instrument signals on the same connector, which is exactly what lets a single 1U box cover a whole tracking session. The remaining two are on the front. It is a small decision that changes how you work. 8 you cable once into a permanent snake and forget about, and 2 you can reach without walking behind the rack. A 3.9-inch 24-bit RGB display sits right on the front panel, putting every single channel in front of you at a glance with no menu diving required. 26 inputs and 28 outputs, all told. 54 simultaneous channels of audio moving in and out of a single rack unit without a single compromise made anywhere along the entire signal path. Every single one of those channels has its own gate, compressor and 4-band parametric EQ running entirely on the interface itself, configured from CueMix Pro and recalled automatically with the session. Routing is handled entirely in software rather than on a patch bay wall covered in cables. Any source to any destination saved and recalled automatically as part of the project. 8 DC coupled line outputs, dual independent headphone outputs, a dedicated monitor group, the things you reach for constantly without ever really thinking about them. That is the capture end of the entire system. Now follow that same signal onward to the room where it actually gets distributed. If the 10-tree is where audio first enters the building, the 16A is exactly where it gets organized. The 16A is the routing specialist and it makes an unusual choice. It has no microphone preamplifiers at all. That is deliberate. It assumes your preamps are already in the rack and it gives the space to line level connectivity instead. 16 quarter-inch TRS line inputs, 16 quarter-inch TRS line outputs, all balanced, all mounted on the rear panel, arranged in one continuous bank because the sheer density is the entire point of this unit. 32 inputs and 34 outputs, all told. 66 simultaneous channels of audio, more than either of the two front ends, packaged into the same single rack unit. And uniquely in this entire ecosystem, the 16A carries two 3.9-inch RGB displays side by side. So every analog and digital bank can be metered simultaneously rather than switched between one at a time. Here is the specification that surprises people. The line outputs are DC coupled. There are no blocking capacitors in the path, which means the 16A can route control voltage from your DAW straight into a modular synthesizer exactly as readily as it routes audio. Optical expansion adds another 16 channels of ADAT at 44.1 and 48 kHz or 8 channels of SMUX at higher sample rates. Word clock in and word clock through, dual gigabit network ports, 2 full optical banks. Every single connection on that rear panel terminates somewhere deliberate. 32 in and 34 out, and underneath it all, the exact same engine you have already heard about at that exact same price as the other two. The patchway itself lives entirely in the software now. Any input to any output in any combination stored with the session instead of tangled behind the rack forever. Input trim, mix sense, mixing, output trim and full parametric EQ. The same CueMix Pro you already saw on the 10-tree, addressing a different set of physical connections. Capture handled by the 10-tree, distribution handled by the 16A. Between the two of them that leaves exactly one room to talk about, the room where the actual decisions get made in real time during the session itself. The 848 is built to sit directly in front of the mix engineer at the exact center of the room. It is the control room specialist and it is the most hybrid of the three. 28 inputs and 32 outputs, 60 channels in total, with a front panel given over to the things you touch during a session rather than the things you cable once. A, B and C speaker selection, a physical talkback switch, mono fold down. These are the exact controls a mix engineer reaches for dozens of times in a single hour, and here they are right on the interface itself. 4 XLR and TRS combo inputs with microphone preamplifiers built in, and they are the exact same preamplifiers found on the 10-tree, up to 74 decibels of gain and minus 129 decibel unloaded of equivalent input noise, which quietly means the 848 removes an entire purchase from your budget. Speaker switching, talkback and Q routing all live inside the same box that already converts the audio, so a separate dedicated monitor controller simply stops being necessary. Inputs, outputs and the entire monitor path all metered together at a glance on one single 3.9-inch display right on the front panel. 2 fully independent headphone outputs, each with its dedicated mix. The performer and the engineer stop negotiating over a single shared Q send, which sounds like a small thing. right up until you have actually spent a session doing it. On the rear panel, 8 TRS line inputs and 12 DC coupled TRS line outputs, with the extra outputs specifically feeding those 3 separate sets of studio monitors without a single extra box in the chain. Channels 3 and 4 also carry their own dedicated send and return inserts, so analog output gear can sit directly in the signal path before conversion here too, exactly like it does on the 10 pre. And every single routing decision, every CueMix, every speaker assignment you make is stored automatically and recalled instantly right alongside the rest of the session itself, exactly as you left it. 3 front ends, each built for a different room, one shared engine underneath every single one of them, and one identical price, no matter what you choose. Now comes the part that turns 3 separate interfaces into an actual facility. The MOTU AVB switch is not a fourth interface at all. It does not convert any audio, not even a little. Remember that every interface has 2-port AVB switch built in, so 2 devices, a 10 pre in the live room and 848 in the control room, connect directly to each other with no extra hardware and no extra cost. It is when you reach a third room and a fourth that you need something in the middle. That is exactly what this is. 6 gigabit AVB ports on a single unit, and the precise point at which your building stops being a scattered set of rooms and starts being one unified network. It runs over standard Cat5e or Cat6 cable up to 100 meters on every single run. Ordinary Ethernet cable sourced from any local supplier, pulled by any local electrician. Device discovery on the network is fully automatic. There is genuinely no IT administration required and absolutely no proprietary switch you are forced to buy. This is fully Milan certified, built on the open IEEE 802.1 AVB standard with clock synchronization handled by GPTP, accurate across the whole network down to nanoseconds, which means hundreds of channels of audio traveling between rooms on cables that costs a few rupees a meter instead of analog multi-core pulled through walls. Rooms simply become nodes on the network. Adding an entirely new room becomes a single cable run and a quick configuration change rather than a full rebuild of anything. And because AVB reserves bandwidth for a stream before it carries it, your audio is never competing with everything else on the wire for its turn. The theoretical limits on paper: 150 AVB devices across 37 switches carrying 512 simultaneous streams, 4096 channels of audio total. Put all of that together and the facility stops being a collection of rooms that happen to share a building. It becomes one instrument, sonically consistent in every space and able to grow exactly as the work demands. Every single unit also ships with a genuinely substantial library of sound banks and loop content included right there in the box at no extra cost. The 16A for routing, 848 for command, the 10 pre for capture, one identical engine underneath all 3 and one network binding them together. You choose the geometry, you never choose the quality. Shivansh Electronics is the authorized distributor of MOTU audio interfaces for East and Northeast India. The MOTU 16A, 848 and 10 pre are each at a market operating price of Rs 1,87,900 and MOTU AVB switch is of Rs 52,990 per unit inclusive of GST. 2 separate prices because these are genuinely 2 different things entirely. 3 interfaces that all share one identical engine and the infrastructure that quietly connects every one of them together. To specify a system for your rooms, to arrange a demonstration, or simply to talk it through with someone who knows the platform, get in touch. Everything you need is at www.shivanshelectronics.in. Thank you so much for your time. We will see you in the next video.